In this FULLSEND podcast, the hosts Kyle Forgerd and Steve DeLeonardis, along with guest Donald Trump Jr., talk about the current political climate, and Donald Trump Jr. discusses being cancelled by the media and the social consequences for speaking his mind. He explains that he is willing to express opinions that others might be afraid to articulate. The group discusses the possibility of this episode getting cancelled as well because of the outspoken nature of Donald Trump Jr. Donald Trump Jr. shares that he speaks out on these issues because he wants to leave a country for his 5 children that they can recognize. He also mentions that he has to speak out because his father has been targeted by those who want to see him behind bars, and he fights back because he sees it as a matter of fight or flight. Kyle challenges him by asking if he thinks part of the reason he speaks out is to become more popular and polarizing. Trump Jr. responds that he does it because he believes in what he is fighting for and not because he cares about being popular. He discusses how his political leanings were shaped by his mother's escape from communist Czechoslovakia and his experiences in boarding school in central Pennsylvania, where he saw the decline of American manufacturing. Trump Jr. concludes by saying he speaks out because he believes in the cause and has been blessed with a platform to do so. Kyle Forgerd and Donald Trump Jr. discuss their reactions to the arrest and indictment of former presidents, as well as the case against Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. Trump Jr. expresses frustration and a sense of numbness towards the constant news of arrests and indictments, stating that he is pissed off about it, but has become desensitized to it. The conversation then shifts to the topic of Ron DeSantis and his stance on Ukraine and Putin. Trump Jr. notes that DeSantis took a weak Trump stance and then changed his position due to pressure from his donors. He argues that this is the difference between being beholden to the establishment class versus being free to do what needs to be done, as Trump was during his presidency. They also discuss the issue of governmental institutions being weaponized against citizens, with Trump Jr. arguing that this is one of the biggest issues faced by the country. According to Trump Jr., politicians like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is a career politician, need the money from big donors in order to further their goals and are thus beholden to them. He also points out that this is why politicians went after his father, Donald Trump, so hard because he didn't need them and they don't want other independent, wealthy individuals in power. The conversation then moves on to the upcoming elections, and Trump Jr. believes that many people who were previously on the fence about Trump have now woken up to the hypocrisy and lies perpetuated by the media and establishment politicians. Regarding Ivanka and the Kushners not being involved in the campaign, Trump Jr. states that the campaign is brutal and it takes a lot of mental fortitude to handle the criticism, especially since Ivanka was once beloved by many in New York City but is now hated by those same people. They mention that they know people who pretended to dislike Trump publicly but who actually held positive opinions about him privately. They also talk about how Trump's strength and ability to make deals contributes to his success in politics. Furthermore, they discuss the potential dangers of AI and social media. They mention that social media and algorithms create echo chambers that reinforce people's beliefs in a way that makes it difficult for them to consider other points of view. They also express concern about the possibility of AI replacing journalists and creating a situation in which all news becomes homogenized and lacks diversity. They express their concerns about the revenue model of media companies that rely on clickbait and generating traffic. They further discuss the need for better protections for personal information and the potential dangers of platforms like TikTok, which they believe is spying on its users. They suggest that there needs to be a way to isolate the servers to prevent the Chinese government from weaponizing the information against the users. Donald Trump Jr. also shares his perspective on being more cautious with personal information on social media platforms and expresses his support for a parental consent law for social media platforms. They specifically touch on the popular social media app, TikTok, and how it can be both a convenience and a concern for parents. Trump Jr. admits that his kids do not have TikTok, but they do watch too much YouTube. He acknowledges that social media platforms can act as a babysitter and that parents need to monitor their children's activities on these platforms. He suggests that parents should provide consent for their kids to use social media platforms, similar to how they would for other activities. Trump Jr. notes that he is worried more about what his kids are not telling him than what he already knows about their online activities. He acknowledges that children are smart and can figure things out, which can be a concern for parents. He admits that he is not tech-savvy and has boomer tendencies. He tries to limit his children's social media use and encourages them to spend time doing other activities. Further, Trump Jr. explains that kids are impressionable and do not have the same outlook on life as parents, who have experienced more nefarious aspects of social media. He mentions that he tries not to engage with trolls on social media because he doesn't want to build up their platform. Trump Jr. enjoys Twitter but acknowledges that it can be a platform for hate, unlike Instagram. However, he is comfortable playing in that uncomfortable space. Donald Trump Jr. discusses social media censorship and the potential return of former U.S. President Donald Trump to social media platforms. They agree that there needs to be more dialogue and discomfort in discussions for progress to be made. Trump Jr. mentioned that even though his father's Twitter ban is up, he may not return to Twitter due to the company's political biases and roadblocks hindering conservative voices on the platform. He also commented on Twitter's noticeable censorship, which he noticed well before it became mainstream news. Trump Jr. cited Twitter's political donations and the potential difficulty in neutralizing the platform due to its heavily skewed technology employees. The conversation transitions towards the topic of systemic breakdowns, where even if the president is deemed the most powerful person in the world, underlings and processes can hinder progress. Trump Jr. advocates for transparency in government and investigations, so people can make up their minds. They express their frustration towards the bureaucracy that seeks to slow the spread of information, making people feel hopeless. The other side, according to them, wants people to go hide in a corner, curl up and die. They cite moves and attacks that they believe indicate this stance of the other side. They contrast the treatment of the January 6 people with that of the rioters during the Summer of Love in 2020. They mention how the narrative at that time was that the summer riots were mostly peaceful protests. Trump Jr. points out the hypocrisy in the media's messaging and how it affected the narrative. They also discuss how the government handled the COVID pandemic, making people fall in line and be a sheep. Trump Jr. cites his experience of having kept his gym open throughout the pandemic despite going through several court trials. Trump Jr. argues that the government was hoping for submission from small business owners, but the problem was that not all of them could weather the financial storm. Trump Jr. points out that big companies like Starbucks were deemed essential while local coffee shops were not, leading to the destruction of small businesses. He cites an example from the same county he lived in, where even filming pornography was allowed indoors but going to a gym was prohibited. He believes this situation occurred because small business owners did not have strong lobbyists to fight for them. Trump Jr. also mentions how the pandemic affected businesses like hotels, where they had to keep people employed despite not being allowed to operate. He argues that the government did not care about the thousands of people that were employed by Trump organizations, and that they were just looking to hurt Trump by not allowing his organization access to funding that other companies received. Both Forgerd and Trump Jr. agree that the government targets opposition and shows bias in their treatment of people based on political affiliation. They discuss the treatment of individuals who participated in the Capitol riots on January 6, 2021. Trump Jr. believes that some of these individuals who have been imprisoned did not receive due process and were unfairly judged by biased judges. He argues that some individuals who were present during the riots and did not engage in any violent behavior are still in jail 2 years later. Trump Jr. explains that the video evidence contradicts the narrative that was sold to the public, and that some individuals were just taking selfies or walking around despite not being allowed in the building. He shares an example of a picture of a man with horns that was mistaken for him on Instagram, and how he had to post a disclaimer to avoid inciting violence. The conversation then shifts towards the 2024 election and how money plays a significant role in the decision-making process of politicians and consultants. Trump Jr. believes that DeSantis will run for president, and that there is pressure on him from the donor class and political consultants to do so, as they can benefit financially from his campaign. He describes how the political system is rigged to generate millions of dollars for consultants and agents, many of whom have been doing this for years regardless of whether their candidates win or lose. Trump Jr. emphasizes that the political consultant class will not allow DeSantis to forego a presidential run in 2024, as it would negatively impact their income. Donald Trump Jr. talks about the challenges of speaking out against woke culture, particularly in corporate America. Trump Jr. reflects on his experience as a real estate developer from New York City and how it was easier to be accepted and loved by the crowd in his youth. However, Trump Jr. says that there comes a time when one needs to put a stop to the nonsense and challenge the unjust accusations thrown at them. He specifically mentions the Russia scandal and how he was called to give 50 hours of testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee for a crime punishable by death, even when there was no pretense of truth. Trump Jr. explains that authenticity is everything when it comes to social media and that it's crucial to be genuine to gain a following or else it wouldn't work. He also mentions that, although he has a team to help him with social media, he does not delegate everything and takes on the responsibility of posting himself. Additionally, Trump Jr. discusses how others send him memes, and he promotes those that he likes and deems worthy of support. Donald Trump Jr. also discusses political campaign fundraising and the involvement of political consultants. Trump Jr. explains how unscrupulous individuals who broker political donations can take a percentage of the actual donation and then make money off every aspect of a campaign, such as producing and placing TV commercials. He says that there are some consultants who have their hands in every aspect of a campaign and can make 8 figures just on one campaign alone. Trump Jr. considers the possibility of Donald Trump running in the next election in 4 years' time and comments that it would be logical to focus on being the leader of the pack in the future. But there are too many powerful people who want to hold on to the money within political campaigns. They also briefly discussed the possibility of a Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis ticket, while acknowledging that the Constitution prohibits two people from the same state from running together. They discussed the prevalence of things that were once considered to be jokes or parodies, but are now a reality. Trump Jr. attributes this to an attack on societal norms and an indoctrination push towards communism. He cites examples such as attacks on the family structure, gender affirmation efforts, and the push towards climate change and racism as the only problems in the world. Trump Jr. believes that this is an effort to control people, and breaking down the family unit makes people more easily controlled. He also points out the hypocrisy of the elites who claim to be pushing for change, but do not practice what they preach. They then discuss their opinions on the idea of globalism and the impact it has had on the world, specifically in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. They express their concern over the power and influence of a wealthy group of hypocrites who push this agenda but do not live by the actions they espouse for the rest of the world. They suggest that perhaps the attack on America and the undermining of freedom is a part of a push towards one-world decision-making, whereby free speech is suppressed and self-censoring becomes a norm for citizens due to the fear of being cancelled. They further point out how the media has brainwashed people to believe in misinformation and cancel individuals who speak out against the narrative. They bring up the cancellation of the most powerful man in the world, Donald Trump, and other individuals who have been cancelled for speaking out. They state that the fact-checkers have not been reliable and have caused damage to people's lives even if they later prove to be wrong. They also discuss the fear they feel due to being censored and the impact such censorship will have on society's ability to have open conversations. The concept of free speech being restricted is deemed as the scariest thing, as this limits society's ability to question and seek the truth. They suggest that common sense has been right 100% of the time, and people who use critical thinking are often labeled as uneducated conspiracy theorists. They discuss how people are afraid to speak out about certain things because of the potential consequences in today's society. They also talk about the influence of mainstream media and big tech companies on cancel culture, and how this leads to inequality between different sides of an argument. Trump Jr. believes that social media has played a role in creating a culture where it is more socially acceptable to identify as bisexual, even if it is not someone's true identity. They also touch on the concept of identity politics, and how it is becoming a distraction from a person's beliefs and values. People are now being elected or supported because of their identity rather than their policies or ideas. Trump Jr. suggests that this is a form of checking off a box to conform to societal pressures. They also talk about the current state of social activism and self-interest in society. Trump expresses his belief that many people who claim to be social activists are merely doing so for superficial reasons and that they do not truly believe or care about the causes they are promoting. He attributes this to the pressure to conform to societal expectations and the fear of being cancelled or ostracized for not conforming. He also argues that self-interest alone will not be enough to ensure a stable future for society, and that people need to have the courage to stand up for what they believe in, even if it goes against popular opinion. Trump cites examples such as the recent trans shootings and the controversy of allowing trans athletes to compete in women's sports and questions why more people, particularly parents of female athletes, are not speaking out against these issues. Kyle expresses his frustration with the idea of males participating in female sports and the controversy surrounding the issue of transgenderism. Donald Trump Jr. shares his father's concern about the consequences of this policy and the possible gaming of the system to advance one's situation. He questions the endgame and the silence from biological women who have spent countless hours bringing their daughters to sports, only to watch their scholarships get ripped out from underneath them. Despite the average person not believing in this stuff, the tiny faction of lunatics has such control over the narrative that it's scary to Donald Trump Jr. Trump Jr. also talks about his fascination with the current state of world affairs and the potential for World War III. He credits his father as the only guy out there who was going to start World War III but did not, and is now the only one being vocal about ending the conflict. They criticize how the American government spends $130 billion on military expenses while facing internal problems. Trump Jr. points out that the military-industrial complex has financial interests in selling missiles to regimes that use them, and that this complex is not interested in ending endless wars since it profits from them. They also talk about how even top-level generals retire and work at big corporations that are now more focused on being woke and promoting diversity training in the military, rather than accomplishing their mission, such as killing bad guys. They fear that this trend could weaken the nation's military power. The conversation shifts to the possibility of World War III, as Biden's administration warns that America is the closest it has been to nuclear warfare since the 1960s. Trump Jr. expresses concern that China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia are forming an alliance and working on getting rid of the US dollar as the petrocurrency, which means America may have to face serious economic consequences. He warns of the total collapse of American society due to excessive spending and borrowing. They speculate about whether this could lead to anarchy or a loss of America's dominance as a global leader. The conversation then shifts to the significance of the Saudi-Iran deal and the potential impact on America's role as a leader in the world. The host expressed concern about the lack of coverage on this issue, especially in light of recent tragic events. They also discuss the difficulties in creating unbiased news outlets and share their personal experience with creating a news app that was shut down by a major bank without explanation. The conversation highlights the fear that certain perspectives or information are being suppressed, which could ultimately lead to a swing in the opposite direction and a loss of power for those currently in control. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of the Pod Slice.